When you think about Batman, your mind probably goes to the grim avenger who stalks Gotham City by night, dishing out a darker brand of justice. And you're not wrong. That's the image that's made Batman one of the most popular superheroes to ever hit the comics page and propelled him to success in TV and movies as well. Since 1939, though, there have been thousands of stories about Batman, and sometimes things get pretty weird. From bizarre adventures to long-lost relatives, there are more than a handful of things about Batman that DC Comics would probably be happy for readers to forget. The Dark Knockoff. After his debut in 1938, Superman's sudden and overwhelming success prompted a massive crowd of imitators, but Batman was different. The darker costume, the menacing demeanor, and even the fact that he didn't have superpowers helped him to stand out in the crowd. But unique isn't really the right word for him. Bill Finger and Bob Kane were pretty much just ripping off the Shadow. The first Batman story, The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, appeared in Detective Comics number 27 in 1939. But 3 years earlier, the Shadow, a pulp hero known for his dark costume and menacing demeanor, starred in a novel called Partners of Peril. To say that Batman's first adventure borrowed from that story is the understatement of the century. It's a beat-for-beat adaptation right on down to Batman's early penchant for guns and his identity being revealed as a millionaire socialite. The good news is that within a few months, Finger and artists like Jerry Robinson and Sheldon Moldoff had more fully separated the Caped Crusader from his inspiration. And hey, at least he's not alone. Just ask Superman if he knows anything about Clark Doc Savage and the Arctic Fortress of Solitude he had in 1938. My Brother, My Deadman, and Me. Way back in 1974's World's Finest number 223, Bob Haney and Dick Dillon told a story so weird that even Batman himself referred to it as the most stunning, shocking thing that ever happened in my whole life, which has not exactly been dull. In a team-up with Superman and the ghostly Deadman, Batman followed the trail of a murderer who killed his victims with gigantic, razor-sharp boomerangs and discovered that the man he was hunting was actually the brother he never knew. It seems his big bro, Thomas Wayne Jr., had been driven insane by a car accident from when he was a baby. He learned how to make boomerangs as part of his therapy and was then manipulated into a very complicated murder spree. And that's not even the weird part. That happens at the end of the story when Deadman, a ghostly superhero with the ability to possess the living, just decides to take over Thomas's body as his new flesh-and-blood home without ever telling Batman. Instead, he just assumes that his buddy Batman would be cool with it and wanders off to have his own adventures. Needless to say, while we would eventually see more of Thomas Jr., no other creators ever referenced this particular story again. Alfred Goes Bad. Speaking of weird things that have happened to the Batman family, Alfred's brief tenure as a telekinetic crime boss who looked like a humanoid golf ball is also something that we don't really talk about anymore. In 1964, Jack Schiff and Sheldon Moldoff seemingly killed off Batman's butler Alfred, having him sacrifice his life to save the dynamic duo. 6 months later, though, Batman faced a new foe, the Outsider. For almost 2 years, the Outsider challenged Batman and Robin, acting as a mastermind who manipulated other villains. And when they finally confronted him, he was revealed to be Alfred. It turned out that their faithful butler had been resurrected by a scientist whose regeneration machine turned him into a mutant who hated his former employers. Fortunately, the process turned out to be extremely easy to reverse, and before long, he was back to dusting the Batcave. And believe it or not, this one actually did get referenced again later on. Nocturna's Custody Battle. If you're a casual Batman fan, you might think that he only did weird stuff back in the long-ago days of the Silver Age. Once the 80s rolled around with Dark Knight Returns and Death in the Family, things got dark and serious, right? Sure, as long as dark and serious includes a vampire taking Batman to court to get custody of Robin. It happened in 1983 with Natalia Knight, who was about as close as you could get to a vampire without actually having someone get bitten on the neck. While working as an astronomer, she was zapped by a weird ray that drained her skin of pigmentation and left her super sensitive to light, so naturally she decided to become a supervillain named Nocturna, like you do. She also fell into a love quadrangle with Vicky Vale and Alfred's daughter Julia, who were all vying for Bruce Wayne's affections. The thing is, rather than long walks on the beach, Nocturna's strategy involved waiting for Bruce to adopt a new ward, Jason Todd, and then adopting him first so that Bruce would have to marry her if he really wanted to be a Bat Dad. The weirdest part? It almost worked. Jason actually said in court that he'd prefer to be adopted by Natalia, only to reveal later that it had all been part of an ill-fated attempt at going undercover. Eventually, Nocturna was seemingly killed in a hot air balloon crash. No, really. And that was the end of the world's most complicated marriage proposal. Electric Death. When you think about Batman's greatest enemies, the names that usually come to mind are the big ones. The Joker. Ra's al Ghul. You can even make a pretty decent argument for the Riddler if you really put your mind to it. But if you're going by who actually had the most success at the goal of actually killing Batman, then the Dark Knight's greatest foe is actually a guy named Lester Bukinski, the Electrocutioner. Yeah, it's hard to believe, especially since he technically killed Batman by accident. The Electrocutioner was another vigilante who figured that if you couldn't bring the criminals to the electric chair, you might as well bring the electric chair to them. In a 1992 story from Detective Comics, he and Batman were on the trail of the same criminal. When the Electrocutioner zapped him with a shock big enough to stop his heart, Batman was technically dead for a good minute and a half. The only reason that he didn't stay that way was that Robin was there and had the good sense to wear an insulated costume. While the Electrocutioner originally just shrugged off literally killing the Batman, Robin eventually beat enough sense into him that he agreed to use his electric gloves as a defibrillator to shock Batman back to life. And then they both presumably agreed to never again speak of the time Batman almost died in a sewer at the hands of a D-list schlub that had to be beaten into compliance by a spiky-haired teenager with a stick. The Dark Knockoff returns. With Batman's popularity, it's no surprise that Gotham City would become a pretty important place in the DC universe. The last 75 years have seen a history develop for the Dark Knight's hometown that's also seen it serve as the home of other superheroes from throughout the timeline of the DC universe. The Golden Age Green Lantern, a violent vigilante called the Reaper who was around in the years before Bruce Wayne's parents were killed, and even cowboy anti-hero Jonah Hex, who was hanging around there back in the 1800s, and also in the future. It's complicated. Of course, it's one thing if Batman's not the first superhero to make his home in Gotham City, but if he's not actually the first Gotham superhero to dress up as a bat, well, that's a little weird. In 1998, an unexpected tale in the pages of Chase, a short-lived but underrated comic series, revealed that Cameron Chase's distrust of masked Avengers came from the fact that her father was one, the Acrobat, who fought crime in the 70s alongside an obscure and hilariously named team called the Justice Experience. Unsurprisingly, the story doesn't end well, but once you know he was out there, it's hard not to think that Bruce Wayne was biting his style. The corpse that wouldn't die. The Electrocutioner wasn't the only one to score a technical kill on Batman. In The Brave and the Bold number 115, however, the culprit was even less impressive. A booby-trapped rain spout rigged up by a couple of completely average criminals. The shock did him in, but thanks to Batman's iron constitution keeping his heart beating, he's only mostly dead. Fortunately, the Atom gets the bright idea to solve the Batman's final case by shrinking down and hopping around on his brain in hopes that this will stimulate his crime-fighting instincts and allow him to mindlessly do things like punch out crooks and rescue a kidnapped girl. And it actually works. It turns out that having a little tiny man hop on your brain is enough stimulus to basically jumpstart everything and get you back in good working order. It might not be that great for the legend of the Batman to have him die at random by jumping at the wrong window, but that's balanced out by the fact that death itself cannot stop him from getting up off a slab in the morgue and busting criminals' jaws all over Gotham City.